So you gonna buy a new iMac?
Ooh, I'm tempted. I really like that orange one, but no, I don't think I'm going to. It's a big iPad on a stand.
That's a good way to think about it. I haven't thought about it that way. I have been keeping my eyes on the iMac territory, and it's primarily because of the computer that I use for our church to do like all the slides and stuff. It's a pretty hefty workload that machine has to handle.
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching the iMacs, waiting for them to put the M1 in it. And I saw that, of course, they put the M1 in these. They got the new style and stuff, which I like. Not everyone likes it. I get that. The problem, there's one major problem I've run across with the M1 Max. I think that the power and what they're able to do is awesome. Like, I don't think there's anything, like, if I had the machine and I never had to plug anything into it, I think it's a solid machine. All of them. I think anything that's got the M1 in it seems to be a pretty solid machine. However, the M1 chip does not allow you to plug in an external GPU.
Right.
And I do that regularly with 2 or 3 different machines at my work for a variety of reasons. That machine being the one that has to have at least one external GPU because the onboard isn't enough to do everything we need it to do. But because the M1 doesn't allow me to plug in an external GPU, I can't use it. So until they figure out something along those lines, and if they don't ever enable it, I'm going to be forced to go into the PC world with it because
oh boy,
I don't get enough outputs off of an M1 Mac. So it's just the way it works.
Well, I'm not sure what you need out of outputs because I am using an M1 Mac Mini, which if I were to say you're going to buy an M1 Mac, which one should you look at? Look at the Mac Mini because it's going to be the cheapest. The refurbished ones are like sub $600 now.
Sure.
And it's the exact same computer. It's the exact same M1. So if you really want an iMac and you want it because the iMac is beefier than the Mac Mini, this is not the computer for you. Wait till the next bigger iMac with the M2 or whatever comes next.
Right.
That's going to be obviously a more powerful chip. But the M1 itself is not bad. I mean, the computer itself has limited inputs. You are correct. It's got 2 USB 4/Thunderbolt 4 ports, a couple of USB-A ports, HDMI, Ethernet. I forget what else. But I have a Thunderbolt dock, a Thunderbolt 4 dock from OWC that I bought because it was in stock and I needed to expand this. And I knew that with Thunderbolt 4, you can actually plug a single Thunderbolt 4 cable from one of those ports and you can basically reproduce the Thunderbolt 4 ports.
Okay.
So that OWC Thunderbolt dock that I have in front of me gives me from one Thunderbolt port 3 separate Thunderbolt ports plus 3 additional USB-A ports.
Okay.
And it is crazy how much stuff I have plugged into this Mac Mini.
Sure.
So I've mentioned before, I have a workaround for using 2 monitors. I've got 2 USB-C monitors. And so one of those is running through a converter into HDMI. One of them is plugged right into the Mac Mini itself. Then I've got the Thunderbolt dock. And from there, I've got, with all that stuff, I've got a Stream Deck. I've got my MixPre 3. I've got my other audio interface, the Audient ID4. I've got my Canon EOS 70D that I am broadcasting video through right now. I've got 2 separate dedicated cables for an iPhone and an iPad. I have 2 external drives, one which is archive projects and one which is a time machine backup. And it handles this no problem. I say no problem because it's still the M1 and every once in a while the kernel panics.
Yes. Yes.
But that happens regardless of how many things I have plugged into it.
Yeah, I hear you. I do.
So it's pretty impressive hardware-wise. But you're right. The external GPU, I do not think you can plug that into an M1 Mac.
Yeah, I mean, I'm trying to get 1, 2, 3. I'm trying to get 7 video outputs out of it.
Probably not.
So I know the onboard can't do it, which is why the external. And I'm using a Thunderbolt 3 eGPU on it currently, which with the 4 video feeds I'm sending through that, it's actually slightly above the recommended bandwidth going through that Thunderbolt 3 cable, which is why like I've got an extra short, like a 9-inch, maybe it's 12-inch Thunderbolt 3 cable, because I have to try to keep that as short as I possibly can. So it's like right behind it. So yes, I think, they may re-enable that in the M2 realm, but for now I'm being forced to avoid it.
Yeah.
And I can't even move like my personal laptop to that at the moment, because my personal laptop is where I do all the testing on those whenever we change those video feeds. Like, so I have to plug it into eGPUs fairly regularly too. It's at least weekly that I'm doing that to mess with some things and try to fix different issues. So I can't move my personal one over to it yet either. So here we go. Round and round and round we go.
You mentioned something which I think is very important for anybody who is connecting any sort of Thunderbolt device. I'm not sure if this is the case with Thunderbolt 4, but I know it is definitely the case with Thunderbolt 3. There is a limit on how long the cord can be and still be Thunderbolt 3.
Right.
And this is the problem, is that Thunderbolt and USB-C and now USB 4, I believe, they all look the same. If your cable is longer than a meter, it is not a Thunderbolt cable. It is a USB cable. And you are going to get USB speeds, which are going to be significantly lower. I know people who, and I've probably made that mistake back in the day. Like, you have this USB-C cable and you're plugging it into a Thunderbolt something or other, and you're like, well, why isn't it working? It's because your cable is too long, which is kind of hard to believe, but it is true.
Yep, it's true. This is why they tell you, if you buy a new Mac and you're going to do the transfer of all your data, it's why they tell you that you can't use a Thunderbolt 3 cable that is your power cord. It's because it's so long it can't be a Thunderbolt 3 cable. So that's why. But you can take, like, the ones that come with Thunderbolt 3 docks, they're made for that, right? So
yeah, usually
they're 1 foot long. Those will work for that.
Yep.
Tech problems. Who knew that distance of a cable mattered?
Totally does.
Great fun. Well, Apple, of course, always has new stuff, and we're, of course, always infatuated by it and curious about it. And I was just curious if you're going to move, but I forget that you have the Mac Mini, so you probably don't have a need to go to the full iMac.
No, and I was expecting to buy a new iPad, but to be honest, I don't want the 13-inch, plus it's way too expensive. Maxed out 13-inch iPad is like $2,400. Right. So it's more than a MacBook Pro, and it can't do what a MacBook Pro can do.
Yep.
I know it's not that simple, but essentially for like how I use it, if I'm going to pay that much money for a computer, I want it to do computery things, not good notes.
Yes, I hear you.
So I'm hanging on to my 2018 iPad Pro, which is completely fine, and probably am only going to buy the new Apple TV remote because I can't stand the current one.
Yes. It's one of the first things I noticed. It's like, oh, you can figure out how to get it the right way up. Like, that'll be amazing.
Now made for human hands.
Yes. Yes. Oh, great fun. Well, we don't have any follow-up on our outline for today.
Not really.
Mike has a couple, I think, but not pertinent to today because he's been on sabbatical and not able to do things, it sounds like. So,
well, not able to do things, but intentionally choosing not to do things.
Yeah, right.
I have basically played with Obsidian, and that's about it.
Sounds like a very productive week, right?
So productive. You have no idea. Got so many Kanbans going on.
Everybody's obsessed. I blame Cal Newport.
Yep.
That's what I'm saying.
Oh, long-term follow-up, I guess. I didn't tell you this, but
okay.
I do have a VA starting on Monday.
Ooh, how far back does this go? I feel like you've had this in the works for a while.
I've had this multiple times, I think. I know not too long ago, I made a list of things that were delegatable. Maybe it was the episode where we covered A World Without Email by Cal Newport. But yeah, I have a VA that is going to be working with me starting Monday for about 8 to 10 hours a week.
Okay.
And starting off a little bit lower than that. and until I get some systems set up. Using Trello to delegate stuff. I still have to create all like this is how I want my calendar to work, all that kind of stuff. But
Sure.
already got some things for the VA to help out with. And this I feel has been a long time coming, and I finally decided to do it. So
yeah,
talk to Rachel about it. She's gonna use it too. And it just seems like we've been at the point where we can handle stuff, but it's kind of it's not burdensome where like it's ruining our time, when we're at home or anything like that. But we're starting to feel some of the pressure of like the things that we need to do.
Sure.
And so as we were thinking and talking over a sabbatical about like, well, what could we do to make things a little bit simpler? I floated the idea of the VA, and she's like, well, what would the VA do? And I had my list already, and she's like, wow, that's actually a lot. You think I could have her do this, that, and the other thing too? And yeah, I think you could. So we're going to go for it.
Nice. I'm curious, do you have a few of the things you're planning to use or have the VA do for you that you'd be willing to share? Just curious.
Yes. Let me pull up Trello, because that's where all this stuff is going to be. Cal Newport would be proud.
Good job.
We want to get Rachel wants to get a new stove in the kitchen.
Okay.
Ours has been there since we moved in, which now has been quite a while. And she wants to get a gas stove.
Okay.
So we want to get a quote for a kitchen gas line. We've got this cheap plastic tubing that's like a curb around the landscaping outside, which I absolutely hate and has been chewed up by lawnmowers and things. So I want to get like the concrete curbing.
Okay. Yep.
Like I know I want to do it, but it's one of those things that I never really take action on, right? I never make the calls. I never get the quotes. So that's on there. Rachel needs an oil change for the car, so she has scheduled oil change on here. And we're still figuring out like all of the additional ancillary information the VA needs in order to do the things. I know there's going to be a learning curve with this.
Yeah.
Which has always been enough to stop me in the past. I was like, I don't want to think through all that stuff right now. So Rachel being like, yeah, let's do it. That was the push I needed. And now that we've committed to it, I feel like it's going to stick. It's not a big deal to figure out that stuff, but it's the kind of thing that I would never really do until there was a need. So now there's a need.
Sure. Yeah, no, it makes sense. I get it. Those are things I don't like doing, but I feel like I need to do them. So I hear you. Well, now that you're talking about systems already, I feel like that's a good point to jump into today's book, which is Work the System by Sam Carpenter. We had a little bit of a discussion about this on the last recording, in that it's possible to get this book for free. I feel like we need to say this. Like, you can get the PDF of this book for free. And I think there was a link to that in the show notes for the last episode. I assume it'll be in this one too, Mike, right? So
yep.
It's possible to get this book from the link in the show notes. It's not an affiliate link. We're not associated with them at all, because you will pay for the PDF, I think is the way to say that. If you're not paying for something, you're the product, right? So I think that, it's okay what they do, because obviously this book is about systems, right? And they obviously have a lot of systems because they want to increase their own business, right? This is very meta, but they have their own business that they're trying to run, which means that they are regularly working on bringing more people into that flow and into that system, which means that they love to give the PDF away for free, because it's a way to get more people initiated in that flow, in that system.
Yep.
Right? So, as they're saying in the chat, oh, you pay. It's definitely a system. Like, it's so true. It is a thing, right? So, there's nothing wrong with that. It's just something I want to point out, that if you decide to go get the book for free, you're being put into their funnel.
You will get a bunch of emails. Yeah, absolutely. Which I don't really think is a not a fair trade. It's
no.
I think, for people who don't want to spend the $20 or whatever on the the book on Amazon, which I also included that link in the show notes because I actually have a copy of the physical book. I actually have 2 copies, I think, because there was a 2nd edition and a 3rd edition. So I obviously prefer to have the physical books, but for what you get, it is the full book in PDF format. So I don't think it's like a bait and switch or anything. Just if you're going to do that, you know what you're getting into. That's all.
Yeah, it's a standard ebook for exchanging for your email address. That's what it is. It's your standard.
Oh, Blake says there's a 4th edition. I didn't read the 4th edition. I read my 3rd edition.
That's what I have.
The 4th one?
I have the 4th edition.
Dang it.
Yep.
All right.
Which is interesting because it's, so like Martin's saying in the chat, the 4th edition is post-COVID being in the world. And there are a lot of references to COVID in this 4th edition, which is one thing I wanted to ask you about because this is a reread for you, right?
Yep.
And which editions have you read now? Have you read it? This is your 3rd time, 2nd time? Where are you at on this?
Oh, I don't even know how many times I've read the actual book, but I'm interested then. Let's talk about the book from a general perspective here. What all is changed? I know you talked about like there's references to COVID and things like that throughout, but is it very evident that like this whole thing was rewritten for the 4th edition, or is it more like, what was that book we read, Bowling Alone, where there's the addendum at the back?
This one's, it's 2 things. It's kind of spread out through the book, so there is no separate piece to it, but there's also a new preface to the 4th edition. So there's the foreword, and then there's a preface to the 4th edition, and then a preface to the 1st edition, and then an introduction. It's like, how many things do we have to have before?
Yeah, so that sounds like the same format as mine, except it was a preface to the 3rd edition, not a preface to the 4th.
Okay, well, I don't have the preface to the 3rd. Preface to the 4th basically tells us the story of how the book has been evolving over time.
Okay.
And the process that they went through to make it better, and how he thought it was really good to begin with and then got it in his hands and thought it was a failure. And then did it again on the 2nd round and on the next round. And they actually had like a handful of revisions between editions as well.
Okay.
Up to this point. And I don't remember if he said that this 4th edition has been, like, if it's complete. I don't think it is. But I think he's just telling us this sentimental story of how the book came to be in that. So,
okay, so do you think I'm missing anything not having read the 4th one?
I don't think so, because I only recall a handful of places where he mentions COVID and the pandemic.
Okay, that's kind of what I expected.
It's fairly minor. It's not a big thing at all. I think there's a lot of like little changes. There's nothing substantial.
Okay. Is it still broken into 3 parts?
Yes, always 3 parts. They've always been 3
right.
parts. Every book
good.
is always 3 parts, unless there's a renegade author out there that has decided to change it. So, all that to say, the book has been around for a while. It's had a handful of iterations. That's what the introductions and prefaces are getting at. But the book itself is about a systems mindset, which is where part 1 picks up. So the 3 parts, the systems mindset.
Oh, hey, real quickly, that
Yeah.
systems mindset, by the way, he has another book called The Systems Mindset,
I didn't know that.
which is the personal application of Work the System, not the business application of it.
Okay.
I have that one too.
That sounds interesting. I may grab that one at some point. Now that I'm an apartment dweller and have more time on my hand. That's might be something I'll pick up.
All right.
So anyway, the thing here is that there's 3 parts, right? The systems mindset is part 1. Make it so is part 2. Part 3 is so say we all. And I didn't write down in the outline all the chapters. And I think that's probably good, because I feel like if we try to cover all the chapters, this is going to get to be pretty substantial and too much. So I picked out some points here that I think would be helpful. I probably have too many here, but that's okay, I think, in this particular case.
No, that's cool. I don't know about the 4th edition. The 3rd edition has 21 chapters, and some of them are only a couple of pages long. So they're really kind of divided, sort of funky. Some of them are super long, some of them are super short. It kind of really doesn't make sense the way that he breaks apart the chapters, in my opinion. But I agree that the way to tackle this is not to try to cover each chapter. You definitely don't need to, I don't know. This book is, I'll talk about this more, I'm sure, as we get into it. But I went into it thinking like, well, I have a vague recollection of what was in this book, and I could list 5 or 6 things. Like those were the important things that still stand out to me. I'm sure there's a lot more. Nope. It's those 5 or 6 things just told lots of different ways.
All right. That's good for me to know at this particular junction in time. I will say that. Let's start with part 1. Here, I also have 21 chapters. Is this the first time we've potentially had 2 different editions that you and I have read? That we've read the different versions?
I think so. Yeah.
So mine does have the 21 in it as well. I suspect they're all the same titles and such here, and that it's not actually a big difference. But the beginning of this is the systems mindset, and there are 7 chapters in this. And at this particular point in time, like I could probably read you these titles, and I feel like you could probably get the bulk of what's in these on this particular part anyway. So let me read these. Chapter 1, control is a good thing. 2, events did not unfold as anticipated. 3, the attack of the moles. 4, gun to the head enlightenment. 5, building the machine. 6, systems revealed, systems managed. 7, getting it, a room full of boxes. And I would sum this up with 2 points that I put in the outline. One is this is the story of Centratel.
Yep.
The company that he built, the telephone answering service, the company that is behind a lot of this. And that's part 1 is the story there. And 2, in a quasi sort of way, he's explaining what systems are and how to identify them. But I don't know that he explicitly points that out. As they're saying in the chat, this reads like a stream of consciousness novel, but you probably wouldn't get that, Mike, with the fiction world.
Don't you start too, Martin.
I'm glad I got a team starting to rally around you to get you on this one. So yes, let's start with the story of Centratel, because this is, I think, is the bulk of what this first part is about. Now, he does kind of deviate from it a little bit to talk about some things, but for the most part, it's the story of Centratel, which, and I guess it's kind of his story too, right? So he backs up and goes to the days of him participating in Woodstock, right? Which I thought was hilarious. Like, why are we doing, like, okay. This is where he sets up something that I think is fascinating through the whole book, in that he begins his journey in a realm that is defined by no rules and freedom of expression in like any way you could imagine, and being able to go with the flow and not be locked into structure, right? That's a lot of what he talks about in and from his Woodstock days. And then by the time we're done with all of this, we're like heavy into documentation and systems and structure. So it's like these 2 completely different worlds that he's setting himself up here to discuss. But it starts with him in Woodstock realizing that he needed to create stability in his life. And without going through all of the details, he ends up in, what's the state? Ohio?
Oregon.
There you go. It was an O. Ends up in Oregon and buys a telephone answering service and runs it for, I think it's 15 years.
I forget exactly.
And it does not do well. He ends up in a spot where he's running the midnight to 8 a.m. shift, answering phones single-handedly, and then runs the 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. shift doing management. And then somehow sleeps in there, I think, but is what it is. So,
and is a single parent at the same time.
Correct, which is just crazy to me. So that's what he was doing, and it was not going well. he gets to a point where he's not going to make payroll in 3 days. And it's at that point that he realizes he's going to lose the business, right? So he's willing to make a bunch of changes at that point. And decides and has this revelation moment, which I didn't really understand. Did you understand exactly what happened? It just seemed like he was awake at night and something hit him. And it was very frou-frou. I don't know. I didn't really follow what happened.
Yeah. So basically, he gets this revelation that everything is a system, and the bad results he is getting are the result of broken systems, and all he has to do is fix the systems. That's the TLDR. So he awakes with this revelation, excited to fix the business and start moving away from working 80-hour weeks, goes to the bank, convinces them to give him another loan, convinces his employees to hang around even though he can't pay them on payday, and turns things around. That's when I went back and reread it, the way you told it, that's exactly how I remembered it too. And I remember thinking like, well, you fix these systems, you're not going to fix things so fast that things have ironed out in 2 days before you've got to hit payroll. So when I went back and reread it, there was an important detail there about like him having to go back and convince the bank manager to extend one more loan for him.
Right.
But that is kind of the tipping point in his hero's journey, is that he realizes that, there's a better way to do things, and all he's got to do is start fixing the system, starting with the most dysfunctional ones first. And at that point, the score is going to take care of itself.
Yes. And I don't know, like he's laying awake at night, right? And this systems thing goes off in his brain. He gets a higher limit on his credit card, was one of the things he did too.
Yep.
And all these things that I'm like, these are terrible ideas. Like from a financial stability stance, like sell it and run away. Like that's what most everybody will tell you. But he chooses not to do that. And he starts this systems process, which we'll get into what exactly he did. He gets into more of it in the second part here. But he starts this systems mindset rollout, I guess. And it ends up making his business one of the most successful telephone answering services out there. And that is where he sits, I believe, still today. He's still running that, right? Or still owns it at least. He doesn't seem to do a whole lot with it. But
he works 1 hour a week, he says.
Yeah. So he's not super involved with it anymore, but he does make decisions and checks in on it for an hour a week, it sounds like. But that is the background under which this book is written.
Which I got to tell you, I got issues with.
Do you?
I mean, when he's talking about he's only working 1 hour a week, on the one hand, I get what he's trying to do. He's trying to paint this picture, and this is why all the Woodstock stuff is in there, is he's basically saying, if even a hippie like me can get this systems mindset revelation and start applying it and go from 80-hour weeks to 1 hour weeks, like you can do it too. And that's obviously a huge shift. But then later on, he talks about how he wakes up in the morning and he's like rearing and ready to go, and he gets out and he's working with these contractors on stuff. And I don't know if he's just like in the middle of a home remodeling project or something, but I'm like, okay, so that's your 1 hour a week. What are you going to do tomorrow?
Right.
He paints this picture of like, isn't this great? I don't have to be in my business. But on the same hand, in my version anyways, he's painting the picture of this is great because I'm excited and motivated to do my work. And I don't think you can say both of those and reconcile them. Even the people that I know who are retired and they're passionate about something, they're putting a decent amount of work into it. Yeah, you don't have the pressure of like, I got to work these certain hours and I have flexibility in my schedule and I can be home and have dinner with my kids and stuff like that. But the way that he described it here just seemed totally ridiculous when I read it this time.
Yeah. I could see how you get there pretty quick. It seems like, and I don't know if this is in the last edition or not, but towards the end of the book, he's talking about communication in different applications of systems mindsets. And one of those is an explanation of the differences between brand new subcontractors and subcontractors who've been in the business for a while. And the way he refers to that, it's as if it seems like they buy and sell houses a lot.
Sure.
Or build houses a lot. I think he's pretty heavy in the real estate market.
Well, let's hear about Work the System from that perspective then, not Centritel.
That's kind of what I thought.
Because, yeah. Also, when I read that thing about the contractors, I was thinking to myself, he has never been to Door County.
Are they all terrible?
Those contractors have been around for a while.
Oh, have they?
And they act
it's on
just
one side
like
of the
that,
fence.
you know? Exactly. That's just the way life is up there.
Sure.
They will come when they feel like it, when they're not out fishing or golfing or whatever, because the weather's nice.
Yep.
And you're just going to like it because there are no other options.
But if somebody came into the area and responded immediately, showed up on time, and did things to budget, which there are a handful of those in our area that are like that. If someone went to Door County and operated that way, they'd be busier than they could handle. Like, that's just the way it is. You know that.
Well, you'd have to get established there. That's the thing, is like everybody knows everybody and there's all these networks. And so if you want work with a contractor, they have to get the lumber, and the lumber people are only going to work with the people that they work with. You know? They're not going to return your phone calls if you're somebody from Green Bay, let's say.
Sure. Yeah. So you'd have to move to the area probably and get established.
Yep.
Sure.
We've tried that.
Oh, gotta love it. Anyway, in the midst of all of this Centritel story, there are little, I would say, like little paper trails that he leaves through the story about what systems are. He doesn't just come out and define systems at any point in time. He has a few analogies, like the machinery that's under your house that's making everything above ground work, and you don't really think about all that stuff that's underground, but it's there, and it's what helps you sleep, and it's what helps you get breakfast, and he leaves some of those trails, right? But he never sits down and says, here's what I mean by a system. He doesn't ever point that out.
Yep.
And when I got to the end of the book, I was thinking that's kind of frustrating that he never explained that. And then I realized it's because he can't. There's too much nuance. Like, it's not. This is similar to what I think David Allen gets at with GTD, in that people generally are operating with the GTD mindset, whether they realize it or not. They just have flawed steps from one piece to the next. And the more time you spend with GTD, the more places you see it working. Like, that's what he says. Now, leave the qualms with whether or not the system actually does exist in places and you're using it, whether you realize it or not. Leave that aside. The concept of seeing it in places where you didn't previously think it existed, that concept, I think, is what he's getting at with quote-unquote systems mindset, in that if you start paying attention, you can see the systems that lead to something. And one of the examples he gives is his sleep system, which is dependent on mindfulness and eliminating stress and all these different factors that we know go into affecting how well you sleep. He's calling that a system. It doesn't have to be this flows from this point to that point and the data flows. It could be a lot of different things that are seemingly disconnected but are actually connected.
Yeah, I did not catch that he did not define a system. And I guess that's because I have defined it myself every time that I've talked about this.
Sure.
Just real quickly, here's the Internet Dictionary definition. It's a set of things working together as parts of a mechanism or an interconnecting network. But you're right, he doesn't actually define that. He does talk about how they are independent and interdependent. They are, I think he mentions that they're open and closed. So, like, maybe it's worth talking about these real quickly. An open system means there's an input and then there's an output. A closed system, there's nothing acting on the system. The books that are on the bookshelf behind me are closed systems unless I go in there and I highlight things. They were printed, they were bound, they were shipped, and now they sit there not doing anything until I would pick one off the shelf, open it, and read it. At that point, it's an open system. An open system is pretty much everything else. So I think the easiest open system analogy is like a car. You put gas in the car, you push down on the accelerator, and you move. All of those are inputs that affect the system. But what's interesting, the big revelation I got from this the first time that I read it, is that everything in your life, yes, is a system, but like I said, it's independent and interdependent. So all these systems function themselves, but they also affect all of the other systems. And that is a really cool way to think about things. It is very much in line with a lot of like the growth mindset stuff and the personal responsibility, self-determination type stuff that you and I tend to believe in. Like, you can set your own course. You don't just sit there and accept the inputs from your system. You have the ability to make an input into the systems and fiddle with the mechanics of the system and get better results. So that is kind of like the underpinning of everything that he's going to say in the rest of the book. But also, that is kind of summarized in this first section. And then he goes on and talked about it for another, 14 chapters after this?
Yep. Takes his time.
So
he's excited. That's probably the only way I can explain it. Is he's excited.
He is passionate about his systems. That is for sure.
For a hippie. It's very structured.
So sleep as a system, though, I like that. I jotted that down in my node file, too, because I am very careful, I guess, about the systems that affect my sleep. And I have been constantly adjusting these systems for many years because I was diagnosed with epilepsy when I was 18 years old. And so I have to get good sleep and I have to get enough sleep. So I'm going to do everything that I can to set myself up for success. And I learned quickly that there are things I can do which make it a lot easier for me to get quality sleep and get enough sleep. So we've got like blackout curtains in our bedroom. We've got a weighted blanket. I've got blue light filtering glasses now. So even if I happen to be like editing the podcast on my iPad before I go to bed, it's not going to keep me awake. And I think it's interesting that he's talking about this. He says, I'm not sure I believe him, that he had medical testing and he's one of those people that does not need 8 hours of sleep. And that's like 1% of the population. We learned in The Sleep Revolution, I believe, was the book that we read on that. So don't follow his example, but follow his approach where
Right.
You're trying to figure out what are the things that are causing you to not be able to sleep. And I don't think you need to be in my situation. Anybody could take a look at some of their systems which are contributing to their mind racing and feelings of stress and overwhelm at night, not being able to sleep, make some adjustments. And now you've taken a huge step towards making tomorrow a better day.
So this is all the background going into part 2, okay? Part 2 is make it so. This is the part where we start to explore what the process of a mindset towards systems looks like. This is when we dive into the actual process, okay? And he starts with a chapter called Swallowing the Horse Pill, where he discusses documentation.
Yep.
Writing things down.
And he does talk about this in the first section, but this is the main thing that he is preaching throughout this entire book, is these 3 documents.
Yep. So creating 3 different documents. And I have to admit that whenever I got to this point, he started to lose me. Sitting down and documenting these things, like I get it. I get what he's trying to say. But I have been in too many places that have done this, and then the documents just sit and no one ever looks at them. Like I get what he's saying. Like the places that have these documents and they pull them out regularly and they review them regularly and they actually follow them. I get that it's a big deal and it's helpful. Never been around that firsthand. So I've seen a lot of different places that have these and most of them ignore them, which is why I'm like, well, why would I do this? Because it's never used and it's never helpful.
Sure.
Please tell me you have experience with this and this is actually helpful.
I do, and it is absolutely helpful. The problem is you need buy-in from the entire team to constantly keep these things updated. If you see something is out of date, he makes this point. Your number one job at that moment is to update the procedure so that it is accurate. And I have seen too many people who they have to do something. They're trying to get something done. They look at the procedure, they notice it's out of date, and all they're focusing on is completing their task for the procedure that they looked up. And so they have to figure things out. The standard operating procedure no longer has any value, and they just move right past it. And that is the beginning of the end for the systems mindset. So it does take a culture shift where the process is more important than any singular thing that you happen to be doing. I think getting an entire organization to think about things that way is very rare. But I do think it totally can work. And he does a pretty good job, I think, of outlining the case for this. The moment that one of those procedures is out of date, there is now a bottleneck for who can complete that thing. The person who accessed the procedure after things have changed and they figured out the new way to do things, they have now created a dependency for every person who is going to do that in the future to come to them and ask them how to do it. Which, if you think about that rationally, you're like, there is no way I want to sign up for that job.
Yeah.
But you just move right past it in the moment. You don't even never think about it. And I've seen that over and over and over again. So I am a firm believer in Sam Carpenter's methods here. He also says, and I've seen this too, I wanted to see if you had any experience with this. On page 88, he says, does a dictator require documented guidance, structural documentation? Not so much. It tends to get in the way of the tyrant's self-serving freeform manipulations. I've also seen that at work. How about you?
Yep. That's pretty standard, par for the course. Yes. That's probably the norm, would be my guess.
Yeah.
Like, let's not document who we are, because then I can make us whoever I want us to be.
Exactly.
Anytime. And it can change anytime I want.
Yeah. Now, here's the crazy part, though. Those people who are functioning like a dictator, they probably don't want to be a dictator. They probably want everybody to get on board with their vision, and they want to delegate things, and they want everybody to moving in the same direction, and they have pure motives. But they completely negate all of that when they fail to cast a vision, and that's what these documents do. The strategic objective, he says this is kind of like the Declaration of Independence and the general operating principles. This is like your Constitution, just like basic decision-making principles. And then your working procedures, those are the laws. Those are all the standard operating procedure documents that you got to constantly be updating and make sure that they are current. But I also noticed that, like, if you have this mindset of making sure that things are always current and everybody's in on that, stuff doesn't change as fast as you think it does. It's when you are in a hurry and you just move past it and you don't update it, and then you do it again and you do it again, the stuff compounds, and then you go back and you look and you're like, oh my gosh, all this stuff is out of date. But when you consistently are managing it and when you're consistently keeping it current, it's not as bad.
Whenever I say that, like, the documentation thing doesn't work, when I say that, I want to point out that it's the first two of those three pieces. Okay, so the strategic objectives, I found the thing where he's talking about that particular piece, and he says that it's a blueprint in which we acknowledge the day-to-day existence of the business in a mechanized, objective way. So he's basically saying that your strategic objective needs to be something where you're willing to think about it from a systems stance, right? So you're writing something down, you're making a statement in that way, right? Mm-hmm. And then the general operating principles are guidelines for decision making. In my head, those are both kind of the same thing. I had a really hard time getting the difference between those. Maybe I just didn't follow his path there, but it struck me as similar to like Ray Dalio's principles. Like maybe it's that type of thing that he's referring to in that particular case. Do you get the difference between these two? Maybe I'm just off base here.
Sure. Well, the strategic objective, I think there are different versions of this that I have seen in the past, and I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong one. So as part of like the scaling up framework by Vern Harnish, I believe, they incorporate like the Jim Collins big, hairy, audacious goals, and you identify like what is the one sentence thing, like why are you here? Who are you serving? Like they have a process for working through all of that. That's kind of how I view the strategic objective. Like, why do we exist? What are we trying to do here? And then the general operating principles, one of the things that I feel fits this really well, this is not specific stuff, but it's just a bunch of guidelines that the employees can use to make their own decisions. So Martin in the chat had mentioned that Sam Carpenter with his working 1 hour a week is trying to outdo Tim Ferriss, but Tim Ferriss has one of those guiding principles that we talked about where if you can solve the customer's problem for under $100, just do it, right? So that is a general operating principle. But the working procedure would be, this is how you issue the refund in the credit card payment processor or whatever. This is how you create an Amazon affiliate link when you paste it into the show notes, all those kinds of things.
Yeah, no, that makes sense because like the working procedures, I'm 100% on board with that. To me, and this is one of the points I put down, it's like those working procedures are an eerie throwback to Checklist Manifesto.
Sure.
From what I've just like, as I was reading it, that was instantly what came to my mind. Is like, oh, well, this is a step-by-step for how to do that. Oh, that's a checklist. Like that's immediately where my brain went. I don't think that's wrong per se, based on what I'm reading here. Maybe if I followed Sam Carpenter and what's the other guy's name? Josh something.
Josh Fonger?
There you go. If I followed those two, maybe I would have a different view of that. But in my head, working procedures are just checklists.
Yeah.
They're itemized point by point how you do things. It wouldn't necessarily be actions as per se, as like they could have things that say like, make sure this exists. It's not an actual thing you're doing. It's just a thing to ensure. Like maybe that's some of what's going on. But the first two though, like I get what you're saying with the general operating principles. Like if it's this, always choose these. Like if you can set up those principles, I could see that would be helpful.
Yeah, the working procedures real quickly. The difference here between a simple checklist is that most people create a checklist with assumed knowledge. So if you or I had a checklist for publishing a Bookworm episode, it's probably just a list of things, and there's no process for like, here is how you upload the file to Libsyn and how you name the file and all that sort of thing. The working procedures that he's talking about here, though, remember the goal is to eliminate every potential bottleneck. What you basically want with a working procedure is all of the information for someone to come in off of the street and to be able to completely do the job. And most checklists are not written that way to that level of detail.
Yeah, I hear you. That's how we do the ones at church. We use Basecamp to manage like templated to-do lists amongst a bunch of other things, but that's one of the things we use. And I have like a template for a minute by minute of a Sunday morning and everything that needs done at those minutes so that either myself or my assistant, or if somebody else steps in, they can look through all of that. But each of those to-dos, like if it's something that's more than just a single, turn on this TV. If it's more than that, if it's set the volumes in a certain room, there is a link inside that to-do comment that takes you to another document that shows you what that should look like and how it should operate.
Exactly.
So, like that is the level, because I want it to be possible for somebody brand new to our IT team to be able to just walk that list and be able to run an entire Sunday morning without needing to call or text anybody to figure it out. So that I do. I don't necessarily do that for the stuff that's just me. Like all of my online stuff, like I have templated projects that I create in OmniFocus pretty regularly, like even the one for today's recording. And I had to update it today since we're on YouTube now instead of Twitch. So I had to update that checklist before today's, knowing that it was going to change. But whenever I created that project, it's got all of the restart my back, open this program, position this window, position that window. Like I've got all of those things so that I can get them all exactly where they need to go. But again, that's a checklist to me.
Sure.
But am I following you in that a working procedure is similar to what I'm doing at the church, not necessarily what I'm doing for me?
Yeah, because remember, this is the business version of this book. So your checklist is for you. No one else is setting up your live stream for you. The minute you have to delegate that to somebody,
Yes.
there's a whole bunch more information that's required.
Correct.
Which is interesting for me as I go through this because I'm working with a VA now. So I'm going to have to create a whole bunch of this stuff.
Yep, I hear ya. I do. Okay, so I can get behind documenting like working procedures. I could get behind the concept of documenting the general operating principles. I don't know what those would be for me. Like, I have no idea. I wouldn't even know where to start on that. So that was one thing that I struggled with. I was like, okay, he's pointing out what you should do and what this is. I didn't feel like he had very many or very good examples of what this could look like. And maybe that's why I was a bit lost in that.
Yeah, you're 100% right. It doesn't have great examples for this. When I was thinking of general operating principles, I was thinking of our family core values.
Okay.
I feel like that's a version of those. These are the values that we filter all the decisions that we make through. And a lot of companies will probably have core values as well. The way he describes this, though, it's bigger than just the core values. There are those just like general rules for how things get done. Like I mentioned, the Tim Ferriss example, spend the $100, don't even ask me, that kind of stuff. That's not a core value, but it's still kind of a general operating principle.
Right.
But I think core values are the place that you start when you're talking about this kind of stuff. Then the strategic objective, your Declaration of Independence, that's kind of like your mission statement. And I have seen way too many poorly written business mission statements. But that's what this is.
Yeah.
Why are you even here? Why do you do what you do? I guess I would call this a life theme in my faith-based productivity course. So my strategic objective, if you wanted to define it that, is to help people answer the question, why am I here? By inspiring, encouraging, and teaching them to connect to their calling, discover their destiny, and live a life they were created for. That's my strategic objective. It doesn't have to be any more complicated than that. But I do think that it's something that you really do need to think about, not just for a business, but for yourself as well. And I think the time estimates that he gives here are pretty good, where the strategic objective, he says you can figure that out in a couple of hours. Your general operating principles are probably a couple of days. And then the working procedures, you're going to be working on these the rest of your life, which is not wrong. He makes an important point about those, by the way, in this section about how you don't find time, which is, I think, the mistake a lot of people make when it comes to keeping working procedures up to date, is you think like, oh, I'll go back and fix that when I have time, and you don't have time. So you have to make this the most important thing so that it always gets updated in real time. And when you do that, that's really the only way I think this works.
Sure. Do you think the strategic objective, I'm thinking about like life purpose, mission statements and such. He specifically calls out that this needs to involve, like you're saying, the Declaration of Independence in a mechanized way. Like he specifically points that out when he mentions a strategic objective, but most of like what you and I would talk about with purpose and mission and such, core values, we wouldn't call out a systems mindset at all, but he's saying that that's important.
What do you mean?
Let me pull it back up where it was. I would give you a page number, but our pages are different.
While you're trying to get that, I'll just mention like the purpose of all of these documents is so that you can delegate stuff effectively, right? So if you are going to delegate things to people, then you need to cast some vision as to what doing this successfully looks like. And that's where I feel the vision and why we're here, why we do what we do is important. And I think a lot of companies in particular kind of overlook that, and they just focus on the tasks that they are trying to get done, and they don't ever stop to ask why. What difference is this making?
Sure.
If you're a leader, though, you really need to figure this stuff out if you want to stop playing Whac-a-Mole, which is a very effective analogy he shares in that first section of how most That's a generalization, but I think it's probably accurate how most people who lead companies lead is they just are responding to things. And if you stop to think about why this thing is surfacing, you can trace it back to a broken system somewhere, probably a broken communication system where that vision was not cast effectively.
Sure. Well, this is here. Let me read this italicized piece in my book about what a strategic objective is. Okay. The strategic objective is not a nebulous, feel-good mission statement based on self-aggrandized hope. It is not something designed to make the board of directors feel good about themselves or intended to impress stockholders and staff. Instead, it's a blueprint in which we acknowledge the day-to-day existence of the business in a mechanized, objective way.
Okay.
So that's why I say he points out the mechanized piece there. What's the next? Without syrupy excess, it includes a brief narration of what the company does, where it's headed, and how management and staff will get there. Keep it to one page only.
Right. So most mission statements are, we exist to make the world a better place, right? No specifics on how your particular company and your particular industry is going to impact that at all.
Right.
So that is where that's how I interpret that. Maybe I'm wrong with this, but I'm thinking more like, we create this product to help people do this thing so that they can achieve this result. Now you understand how what you are making is going to be used, so you can take that information and you can use that to influence the decisions that you would make in the production of said product. And this is a product, not a service, but hopefully you kind of get my drift with this.
Yeah.
Like once you understand where you're going from a high level, then it brings like passion and purpose to the menial tasks that you're doing. Putting in the screws, that's actually contributing to helping that person achieve their dream, right? And that's something that a factory line worker can get excited about. It doesn't happen automatically. And that's why I say like this is really important from a leadership perspective, is like you have to make sure that this stuff filters down. It's very easy to just say, well, here's the working procedures, right? So just work off of this stuff. And then people are burned out and frustrated and they don't want to do it anymore.
Right. I think the piece about this, having reread that particular part, it's interesting how my brain kind of clouded some of that in reading the rest of the book, because that's about halfway through where he's calling that out. And it's interesting to me that it's a one-page document and that it's designed to show where we're currently at and where you're wanting the company or the person to go, right? And how you're going to get there. And I think that's potentially significantly more than, what am I trying to say? It's significantly more than like a mission statement and such. Like it's not just a quick 2-3 liner.
Yeah.
This is a full thought out narrative, right?
Exactly. It's not just where we want to end up, but it's how we're going to get there.
Right. So maybe, to me, it feels like one of those documents that this is an important document to create. It's not necessarily one that you're looking at a lot.
Correct.
Like if you're sitting down with people and you're creating it together, it's one of those that you pull out and rewrite every year so that you can figure out how your plans have changed over time. I can see that.
Yeah, you review it every quarter when you're making your plans.
Sure.
Things that we're going to be selecting, the projects we're going to engage with, are they in alignment with this vision of where we want to go?
Yep. Yeah, I could totally see that. I really don't want to do it though.
See, this is the exciting stuff for me. I love not only figuring this stuff out for myself, but helping other people kind of figure this out for themselves, because I think when you do this, there can be a lot of hesitation to engaging with the process, and there is no shortcut to this. But when you land on the thing, it does bring excitement and motivation to everything then that you do.
Sure.
And when you're talking about motivating people, and again, this is a work context for this particular book, but I think this applies to any organization as well. I think in a church context, this could be really effective because you are working with largely a volunteer workforce, right? No one's getting paid. They don't have a boss that's saying you must do this or you're getting kicked out. So you got to motivate people or they're not going to do it.
Yep. Yeah. You're forced.
Yeah. And how are you going to motivate them, right?
Yep.
You're going to show them how what they're doing is making a difference, and you're going to sell yourself. That's what leadership is, right? You're going to sell the belief that you can help people get where they want to go.
I'm with you. All right, let's go on to part 3 here.
Sorry, one more quick thing.
Okay.
Yeah, we have to cover this. So chapter 9 under We Are Project Engineers, at the end of every one of these chapters, he's got these little stories. Some of them are good. Some of them are ridiculous. This one is ridiculous.
Okay.
So according to Sam Carpenter, there is only one correct systems way to load the toilet paper.
Yep.
Do you remember this?
Somewhat, yes.
It's in the 4th edition? Okay.
I'm going to double check. Which chapter are you talking about? 9?
Chapter 9, yep. This highlights my biggest issue, I think, with the book, which is he uses very grandiose language, which is very much of a stretch sometimes. Remember, he is talking about whether toilet paper hangs over the top or hangs out to the bottom. And he basically makes a very passionate argument that the only correct way from a systems perspective is hanging over the top. And when you read this and you're just like, okay, cool out, Sam.
Yes, it is still on toilet paper. I remembered reading something about toilet paper, and it's a 3-pager at least in mine. It's a 3-pager on that. I just couldn't remember if it was on that specific chapter.
Yeah, and that, I don't know. I get what he's trying to do there. And he says at the beginning, this is a ridiculous example. But this is a written medium, and he's using the same types of words that he's using other places. So he's doing himself a disservice, and he's making the other places that he uses language like this, he makes it less impactful because you're recalling, oh, you said the same thing about the toilet paper.
Yes, because toilet paper and business decisions, real estate decisions, definitely on the same scale. They're definitely on the same territory.
You know why he was working 80 hours a week, right? Is because he had the toilet paper on the roll wrong.
Exactly. You got it. We have outed you,
The minute
Sam.
he turned it around, it went from 80-hour weeks to 1-hour weeks.
That was his revelation. How to get the toilet paper on the correct way. And now my whole career is going to be changed for the better.
Yep.
All right, let's go to part 3. So there are a lot of, I guess, follow-up tidbits that he wanted to say here. And that's a lot of what this part is about. One of the chapters here is called Point of Sale Thinking. And this one stood out to me because I feel like it goes against some of what you and I tend to ascribe to. And it's one that actually sparked my choice for our next book, which I'll talk about later.
Oh boy.
And let me read the first sentence of this chapter, okay? Chapter 5, Point of Sale Thinking. The first sentence is, do it now and let's get on with whatever is next. And the concept he's talking about here is don't put things off. Don't give yourself the opportunity to have to decide to do something. Do it now. And I read that and thought, I don't know that that's possible. Like with what I do, I don't think that's actually possible. But at the same time, I realize that a lot of what I do is that way already. If someone brings me a computer with a problem, I'm fixing it right now. Like I'm not saying, well, let me put you on my schedule for some time in the next 3 days. No, they have an issue right now. I'm going to fix it right now. That's how those work. But if I have like an install, I've got a new rack that I'm putting video gear into, I can't just do that now. In most cases, like I have to pick carefully what day I'm going to do that. Because if I were to do that like for example, I just put in a video rec. That's why I use that example. If I were to put that in on, say, Thursday morning, that's a bad deal. Like I'm going to have a lot of problems because they're going to use that stuff Thursday night for rehearsal.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a very good chance I'm not going to have enough time to get it all done in one day. So I need multiple days to work on that and fix any issues with it. So if I start it on Thursday, the day it comes in, I have bigger issues and I created a lot of problems when I should have just waited till Monday when I've got 4 days in a row to work on it and can fix things. So doing it right away and having this point of sale thinking where things come to you, you do it immediately. I feel like that doesn't necessarily apply, and it really depends on the job and the business and what sector you work in. Am I just completely off base with this?
Well, I can tell you when I heard of point of sale thinking, I thought to myself that Sam Carpenter and David Allen are two peas in a pod.
Yes. Yes. So true.
And I have issues with that. Not everything that says, hey, do this now is worth doing. But I don't know. I think the larger point here with the point of sale thinking is to reject procrastination as much as you can. In fact, he says reject it completely. When it comes to these are the things that must be done for the work of the business, I think he's viewing all of these things that he could be doing as already passing through that filter. And I don't think I want to work this way. He also says in this chapter to be relentless in eliminating life spam. And I get it that there are jobs where you're not going to be able to do that. But I am the wrong person to comment on this because I don't want to touch this with a 10-foot pole.
Sure. Makes sense, I suppose. There's just so many times that I see things that come to me, like what you're saying, like he resonates well with David Allen, Sam Carpenter does. And because he has this whole, automate, delegate, discard, I think was the 3-term phrase that he used there. And I think that's probably true, but there are a lot of cases where there's some subjective nuance that you have to decide on things. Like it's not an immediate, here's your answer in a lot of cases. And that's what he made it sound like. That it was very obvious when you have things come to you that as to what needed done with it. And like we get a lot of email, right? So at least I do, hundreds daily. So when I get those hundreds, trying to do inbox 0 the way that Merlin Mann did not intend it is difficult if possible at all. And trying to make those decisions about each individual item without reading it and making a decision anyway, like you can't do that. I have to at least get involved in it somewhat before I can make that decision. But the way he proposed it, it's like you don't have to do that, and you do. At least in my work.
Yeah.
Whenever you have a phone call comes in, your only option is to answer it or ignore it. And in his case, his people darn well better answer it, right? So that's their only option. So when things come to them, they have one decision and one answer that they can give. I feel like I can't do that. Maybe I'm just distorting this.
That's what I was going to say is remember the context of the business that he is working in.
Right.
They are paid to handle these calls that come in. So when a call comes in, there is no option of whether you are going to take this right now. You have to take it right now.
Yes.
And he's building all these systems so they can handle all these calls as efficiently as possible with making as few mistakes as possible. I mean, there probably is not a better match for the work the system mindset than that particular example. But also, there's a little bit of a disconnect here because he's talking about you don't want to be the heroic fire killer. But essentially, the reason for building the systems is so that his employees who are manning the phones can be heroic fire killers.
Correct. Yeah.
And that feels a little bit disingenuous. It's just like you're just passing that responsibility on to somebody else, and now it's their problem and they have to deal with that stress. And he kind of couches it as like, well, actually, Centratel is way better than all the other places. That is probably very true. You probably pay better, and it's probably a calmer work environment than most other call centers. Doesn't mean I want to work in a call center, no matter where it is.
Right. Yeah, I hear you. I just feel like there's so much, and this is why I wanted to talk about this one. It's like, it just seems like there's something I'm missing with this, that the concept of doing things immediately or having very clear answers as to what to do with something. Maybe it's just the industry I work in, the types of things I do, but it's not that clean.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe that's because I just haven't defined it and made it clean. That's part of what I'm wondering is, if I set up these general operating principles, maybe it is that clean. And maybe this is just me not having done that yet. That's some of my questioning.
Well, I think when you force yourself to think through things from a systems mindset and you have clear paths for people to follow on what is the correct procedure, it makes things a lot simpler. In essence, those documents, what they are doing is they are communicating from you to the rest of your staff. And there's a whole chapter in here about hyper communication and how intense management of communication systems delivers freedom. I think that's true. And I think if you were to be really nitpicky about your documentation, that's a form of hyper communication. And especially for an employee like me, that would be very much appreciated.
Sure.
I want a very clear, very detailed explanation of what I'm supposed to do in a particular situation.
Sure.
But there are other ways that communication can happen too. It doesn't always have to be written. I think that's one of the things that I realize differences between working situations. Different people communicate different ways. Some people just like to talk through things, and that's fine. But what Sam Carpenter would say is that if you are talking through something and you're not documenting the resolution of what you've talked through, then what was the point? I think there's some truth to that too.
Sure. One other chapter in this part that it might be quick, might not be. I don't know. We'll see. It's called prime time. And there are two types of prime time that he discusses in this chapter. One of those is biological prime time. That's exactly what you would think it is, right? So this is the time period in the day where you're able to do your best work. This is Cal Newport's deep work times. This is I'm best in the morning. I'm best at night. Like, that's what that is, right? So this is my biological prime time. The other type of prime time is the mechanical prime time. And probably the way that I would explain that one is that it's the time of day when it's best for a thing to happen. Is that fair? Like, this isn't necessarily, it's more around what, I guess, the best time for a thing to happen in a day. I'm just going to say it that way. And the way I read that was that, if it's best for a video to be edited and published mid-morning, well, maybe you're doing the editing the day before, but you're doing the work of publishing it in the morning. That's the best time for it to be published. It's probably a bad example because you can always schedule it, right? So that's a bad example. But if something isn't able to be scheduled for a time in the future, what is the best time of day for things to happen? Maybe a better example is mailing letters, sending physical checks via mail and such. It's best to do that before the mail person comes and picks it up. Like, that's going to be the best time for that what to happen. That's the way I understood it. Now, did I misunderstand it per your view of it?
To be honest, I don't know. He doesn't do a real good job of explaining mechanical prime time.
Sure.
This is what he does say, is he says that biological prime time is your most effective time of day for doing work. It's when you're the most focused. And the mechanical prime time, he defines it, this makes no sense, what you do with your time. But he also says that mechanical prime time tasks allow you to break free from working in your business. So really, The argument that he is making here, I think, but clumsily, is that you should make your documents your strategic objective, your general operating principles, your working procedures during your biological prime time. I think that is the complete idea he is trying to communicate there.
Sure. It's a fun idea. I don't know how it's different, but
I get it, because what he's saying is like these documents, working on the systems, that's the most important thing you can do, right? That's going to help you buy back time. So the most important work you should do when you are sharpest, and that is your biological prime time.
Sure.
The rest of the stuff is secondary, but the moment that you switch and you start working in the business instead of on the business, you start just doing the tasks. And you can feel good about, I was really in flow. I really was able to edit the heck out of that video, right?
Yeah.
But he would say, if you're working with other people, that was actually a waste of your biological prime time, because what you should have been doing as the leader of the organization is working on keeping the documents in order. Because remember, we want to keep these up to date, right? If we don't keep them up to date, the whole thing falls on its face. So I think this is actually pretty good advice.
Sure.
If you were going to constantly be looking at your documents, this would be the time to do it.
Using my best time to write documents that I feel won't be read really feels weird to me.
Exactly. See, that's the thing. He's advocating for an entire culture shift of the whole organization, which for someone in a position like you or me, you probably don't have the authority to say, okay, guys, we're going to go this way now. Right.
Yes.
So you read this and you're kind of left thinking like, well, this is cool, but I'll champion for this, but I really can't do anything.
Yeah. I mean, I could do something with my teams. You know, there's a bank of folks that I could probably do this with, but they're volunteers, so I have to keep that in mind, right? So there's a difference of how you come at that. But I don't know. You know, like Martin's saying in the chat, documents are more tactical and people at the top should think more strategically.
Maybe. I think the working procedures can definitely be tactical, but the other documents, I would argue, are strategic.
Yeah, I think so.
And if you write your working documents well, they very clearly connect to the purpose for the company. Like, why are we doing this? We talked about this with Scrum. And this is actually, I think Scrum, like that's all of the Kanban and the agile work that's being done. But on the other side of that coin are working procedures and mission statements and a lot of the stuff that Sam Carpenter is talking about right here. Right. So in Scrum, you've got, as the business, we want to fill in the blank so that fill in the blank. If you don't know what your core values are, if you don't know what your, what does he call these? I keep messing up these terms. Strategic objective and general operating principles are, if you don't have that sort of North Star as to like where we're supposed to be going, it can be difficult to fill those things out. But the moment that you understand what is the purpose of the organization and what are we really trying to do here, these stories kind of write themselves.
Sure. I suppose. I mean, I could see how you get there, right? It just seems like using the primetime thing, there's so many different ways that he tries to get this across. And I didn't fully connect all of it, but I do get what you're saying, like the documents at a strategic level, coming back to that. I mean, it's called strategic objective. I mean, it's a document designed to help you set strategy.
Mm-hmm.
But it's documenting the strategy that is then to be reviewed at a regular period. So I get it, I think.
He doesn't explicitly say that, maybe in the appendix he gets into that sort of stuff. And I think that's maybe where some of the disconnect can happen.
Sure.
That's how I've seen it implemented, though. And so I can't fathom doing it any other way.
Sure. Yeah. The last chapter here is systems improvement as a way of life. And really, this is it's a borderline manifesto of here's a challenge to you to just consider that everything is a system in your life and that you can improve that system. And I don't think he's wrong in that, as long as you have a pretty loose definition of what a system is, and it can be somewhat abstract. Like the sleep thing, right? That is a system. Or getting out the door in the morning for work. That's a whole system, but it's a set of routines and habits that are making up that system, right?
Yep.
The process of publishing a Bookworm episode or doing these live streams and stuff. The checklist I have that I pull up anytime I'm doing a live stream is 50 plus items long of all the things that I have to tick off and make sure set to make sure that live streams work somewhat decent. So I've just built that up over time. But all of these are systems, right?
Yep.
And he's just encouraging us to think of that as a way of life.
I completely agree with that idea. That's all I'll say before we get into style and rating.
Okay, fair enough. But before we do that, do you have any action items though, Mike? Because I suppose my book, I got to go first, right?
Yep.
I guess this would be 3 because I'm adding one right now.
Okay.
I am going to work on building out a few more working procedures for the beginnings of, say, like content pieces and stuff that I do online. Basically, the online stuff that I do. I'm trying to build out some more of these checklists in the creation of things. Not necessarily, like when I do a live stream, like I mentioned, the 50 plus items. That's a checklist for once I'm ready to start the live stream. That has nothing to do with prepping the live stream content itself. I haven't touched that side of it. That's just all in Joe's brain. That never goes anywhere. I feel like I could get significantly quicker at creating things if I were to try to document how that should work. So I want to start on that end. And then I want to start on, like, what are some of these operating procedures? Operating principles, I should say. I don't know that I'll come up with anything for that. I don't know what I'm looking for in that, but I'm going to reread some of those pieces and give it a shot. And then the one I'm kind of looking at side-eyed is a strategic objective. I'm not going to commit to that one as an action item quite yet. I just need to consider that one now that you and I have talked about it. Because what I originally had in my head, I was like, nope, not doing that. Now that we've discussed this, I'm like, maybe. I need to walk the dog a time or two more. So there we go. That's what I'm going to do, or at least attempt to do. You?
I had one action item, which was to take the quiz, although I just looked at it and I am not going to take the quiz.
That's fair.
But I will say, before we get into style and rating, just to give you some feedback on your action items, I think that if you're going to do these, don't be legalistic about them and try to follow Sam Carpenter's exact method. I think you're kind of missing the point if you try to follow this 100%. Just to give you a bit of an example, my wife and I, must have been 4 years ago, we went away overnight and created these sort of documents for our family. And because I am a systems nerd, we actually called it Schmidt's Family Operating Procedures. And the very first part of it was the strategic objective. Like, what do we want our family to look like? We said we wanted to have a strong marriage and a strong relationship with our kids. Specifically, we wanted them, by the time they were teenagers, to be comfortable talking to us about anything. And so we recognized that there were things we had to do, systems we had to build that were going to produce that result. Well, we revisited it this week because my oldest is now a teenager.
Yeah.
And we had listed a whole bunch of things which we turned into routines, things like weekly date night and one-on-ones with the kids and coffee with a friend and all of these different things. And we went back, we realized that over the past several years, like, some of these things have changed and they've evolved, but for the most part, we did pretty well on what we had set out to do. And for each one of these things, we had listed like what it is, why we want to do it, what's our budget for it, how often we want to do it. Those are kind of like our working procedures for implementing these things, right?
Sure.
And it was cool because with our oldest being 13, we were able to look at like where we are right now, and it's totally where we had wanted to be at this point. And so it was cool to see how like the systems and these documents that we had created for our family, which is really just 3 or 4 pages on a Google Doc, that had led us to this point. Basically, we had worked the system and gotten the result that we were hoping for.
Sure.
Did we create a strategic objective, general operating principles, and working procedures? No, we didn't. But we basically took those ideas and condensed it down into 3 or 4 pages for our family.
Okay. Sure. I get what you're saying. Yeah, I was going to ask you what the caution was there, but I get what you're saying. Like you started with a single document. It didn't really fit these cleanly, but it kind of morphed into something that encompassed all of them in one piece.
Yeah. What you
Gotcha.
want to understand from this book, and it's so long, and he's spreading out this idea so much that it's easy to miss, is you want to recognize like where you want to end up, and then you want to create systems that are going to get you there. And along the way, you want to constantly be looking at your systems and making tweaks to them if you don't like the results that you are getting, modifying them so that you get better results.
Sure.
That is work the system in a nutshell.
There you go. Perfect. Good job, Mike. I'll do some work on it. We'll see what I come up with. Not going to commit to anything specific, I don't think. I'm just going to spend some time with it.
If you wanted to give me an informal action item, I did mention I'm working with a VA, so I'm going to have to create some of this stuff.
Sure.
So maybe my action item is just to create some working procedure documents and have some things that I've delegated by the time we record again.
I'll hold you to that one. Sam Carpenter's style is weird. He likes to ramble in the words that he puts on a page, and I think that is a factor of the revisions and him wanting to get points across where he really shouldn't. I think this is a case of, like somebody in the chat said, stream of consciousness novel. Like it kind of does feel that way. The chapters don't really seem to, like they don't feel broken up correctly. It just seems kind of strange in the layout and the way that he goes from one thing to the next, and they just don't seem to work in the way he intends. Like you can kind of see his vision and what he's wanting it to be. Like the chapter titles and the quotes he puts with them, I get that, but then the way he actually fills it in, strange. and like he's telling, for example, Centratel, he's telling the story of that, but it's broken up over a series of chapters. When I really just wanted him to tell the story, like it could have just been one chapter of Centratel, and don't break it up across 7 chapters, 6, whatever it was he did it in. And that was frustrating to me. His stories are interesting, but he didn't give me stories and examples where I felt I needed them. So I was frustrated by it quite a bit. I thought this would be, being a 4th edition, you would expect it to be pretty well polished and have a pretty solid foundation for taking you through a process, because it seems like there's a set process and procedure that he wants you to go through.
Mm-hmm.
And it didn't follow that very well. So I struggled with it, right? And I feel that he needed some direction, potentially rewrite it to be more clean. So I don't care for the actual layout and the way it's put together. The actual content of like what he's getting across, I enjoy. Like the concept of these are systems and you can work them and here's a way to work them. I get that. Like I'm with you on that. I've been a checklist person for a while now. I get that. It clicks with my brain. It gives me freedom to have that structure. I agree with him on that. So I'm with him on those pieces. Which means that whenever I come to rating this, this is a case where I don't like the book and the way it's laid out and written really much at all. There's pieces of it that I feel like I could extract and works really well. The content's pretty good. The way I got it was not so good. So how do you rate those? How do we normally? We always struggle with these, right? Where you like one half of the setup and not the others.
Yep.
I think that's going to bring me to, I think, a 3.5 here, in that Like, I feel like this could be so much better.
Yeah.
I feel like if somebody took a step back and rewrote this from the ground up, given today's work from home standard that we have and the way businesses operate from a diverse, remote, worldwide market, I think if you were to reevaluate it from that stance as opposed to just a call center, which he does point out, at least in the 4th edition, that all of his phone operators have gone home and they are working remote in the COVID era when a lot of his competitors have closed their doors almost immediately. He's been thriving. So
he must not be monitoring their internet activity anymore.
I guess not. Maybe. I don't know. So all that to say, like I'm going to put it at 3.5. I feel like it could be so much better, though. It feels like it could be a really, really good book. They just didn't hit that mark with the whole process. There you go.
That is fair. That is completely fair. I think there's a lot of really powerful stuff in here, but you kind of have to mine it out. There's one thing which we didn't even really talk about because we got sucked into all the other stuff. But there's this idea of like not working in the business, but working on the business, right? So he has this analogy of you got to get above and slightly outside your situation before you can really see what's going on. I feel like that change of perspective, that's really powerful. So I think this is a 5.0 idea told in a 3.0 package.
Yes. Yes, I'm with you.
That's, and so what I'm going to do for a rating is I'm just going to split the difference. I'm going to give it a 4.0. I do think this has the potential to really open your eyes to the way things are. It certainly had that effect the first time that I read it. I've read enough books at this point to realize that I don't really like the way this one is written. I hesitate to say that it's poorly written, but I do think it is kind of poorly written.
Sure.
I don't think it's just a matter of stylistic preferences. I feel like Sam Carpenter really likes to hear himself talk.
Yeah.
And like Martin said in the chat, it definitely could have benefited from an editor. Maybe he's got an editor and this is completely off base. I don't know. It doesn't feel like that though when you are reading this book. I know initially it was self-published. He did it himself. And I feel like he just continues to work on it himself. But that being said, there are some really powerful ideas in here. I do think you kind of have to make them your own, like I was telling you with the different documents. But if you were to start applying this mindset, I have no doubt that you could start making positive change in your life, especially if this is the first time that you've come across this idea. I feel like recognizing that your life is comprised of a bunch of independent yet interdependent systems is a huge revelation that people can get from reading this book. But it was interesting for me going back and reading it again, having lived in that perspective now for quite a while, firmly entrenched in the growth mindset end of the spectrum. I realized that it wasn't as quality as I thought it was the first time. Like the idea really impacted me, but then I go back and I read it and I kind of see it for what it really is. And I'm like, oh, this is kind of very loosely put together and kind of all over the place. And certain things, like even though you're saying things over and over again in different ways, you still sometimes don't get to the heart of what you're really trying to say. It feels to me, I don't know Sam Carpenter at all, but I do know a lot of people who feel that the more they talk, the more clearly their idea comes across. And that's kind of the impression I got from some sections of this book. It's like he is continuing to use words because he feels this is making it clearer, but it's really not.
Right.
And I will say, like, maybe that's completely my fault and my perspective, and he's writing this for somebody else because I'm not a CEO of a company and trying to implement this with all of my employees. So take it for what it is, but I do think it's a really powerful idea. Just definitely could be polished a bit more.
Or a lot more. Yes. All right. I'm with you. 3.5.
Maybe the 5th edition.
Yeah. Yeah. Seems like at a 4th edition I've said enough. Anyway, what's next, Mike? I'm ready to shelf this one.
All right. Next is a new Greg McKeown book. which is not even out yet as we record this, but it should be Tuesday, hopefully. And that is Effortless. This, I'm not sure if you follow Greg McKeown online at all, but he's kind of been doing some run-up promotion to this and kind of told some of the story behind this book. It's kind of interesting because he's saying that he wrote Essentialism, and then when he had a health scare with one of his daughters, and at that moment, everything that he had to get done, still had to get done, and he realized that he had to figure out a way to make things more effortless. So basically, he had some margin to roll with the punches, which I think is potentially a very cool bookend idea to Essentialism.
Yeah,
I really like his style, at least in Essentialism. So I am really excited to go through this one.
Sure. Yeah, I think that'll be a good one to go through, especially after having read this one. And then into the one following that, that I picked, which I picked ahead of time this time. It's been a while since I've done that. I feel like I'm usually picking them on the show. But I picked The Now Habit by Neil Fiore, I think is how you say his last name. And this was two things. It came from reading the point of sale thinking piece, like do things now. That sparked some of this, but also it showed up in the list of Amazon recommendations next to Carol Dweck's Mindset and James Clear's Atomic Habits. It was mixed in with those.
Interesting.
And I thought, that's some pretty big names to have this sitting in and amongst. So
yeah.
Just reading some of the stuff about it just made me curious. It's like, okay, it's taking one concept that I'm questioning and the idea of habits, which I'm all on board with. So I'm curious now. So I'm approaching that one with skepticism at the very beginning, and I don't even have the book in hand yet. So we'll see.
Joe is approaching his own book with skepticism.
Yep.
This ought to be good.
Yep, we'll see. We'll see how this goes. So it'll be entertaining. I don't have any Gap books. We closed on our house in a week. So I've got tons to do between here and there. So not going to happen this time around. But you?
I have one of those little Michael Hyatt books called Your World-Class Assistant that I am going to be rereading over the weekend.
Okay. That's prepping you for next Monday then, right?
Yep, exactly.
Cool.
I want to do it right.
Well, good luck.
Thank you.
I hope it goes well. I do. All right. That all said, we're super thankful to all those of you who have joined us live now that we've moved over to YouTube versus Twitch. Just want to call that out. If you haven't already, youtube.com/bookwormfm. How do the kids do this? Smash that subscribe button. I feel like that's what I'm supposed to say, but there you are. If you give us a follow on YouTube, you'll see the reminders and the notifications for when we're recording these live. If you're interested in watching those recordings, that's what the YouTube channel's for. So check that out if you're interested in that. Also, if you aren't already, go to bookwormfm/membership, and that will take you to a place where you can sign up to be a member of the Bookworm Club. What is it, $5 a month? And once you do that, you get access to a bank of things. You get access to a special wallpaper that Mike put together. You get access to all of Mike's MindNode files. We've talked about this I don't know how many times, but there's a lot of special things you get for joining that. So we'd love to see you there. It helps us keep the lights on here at Bookworm and helps buy some books occasionally. So super grateful to those of you who are a part of that club.
All right. So if you are reading along with us, pick up Effortless by Greg McKeown, and we will talk to you all in a couple of weeks.